Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Tonight we're diving into a brand new batch of disturbing Reddit confessions. And oh man, do I have some unhinged ones for you. These are the things people only ever admit when they're convinced no one can trace it back to them. Disturbing, unsettling, and a couple that genuinely made me stop and ask why anyone would ever put this into words. So, you're going to want to stick around for these. And seriously, thank you for being here. It means the world. If the channel's been hitting for you, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button and subscribe. It's honestly a dream of mine to hit 1 million subscribers, and every single one of you gets me closer to it. All right, you know how this goes. Lights low, door shut. Grab yourself a drink and get comfortable. And do me one favor. Stick around to the very end, because the last confession tonight changes the way you hear every single one before it. Without further ado, let's get into it. A regular only comes into my gas station the night before someone dies. I'm not at that job anymore, and I'd like to keep it that way. I worked overnights at a combination gas station and diner off the interstate for a little over 6 years. If you've never done a graveyard shift somewhere remote, I don't know how to explain the particular quiet of it. Hours where the only thing moving is the cooler hum and the occasional set of headlights that doesn't slow down. You get to know the road. You get to know who belongs on it at 3 in the morning and who doesn't. It's a bad stretch. I'll say that up front because it matters. Long, dark, no lighting for miles, deer, black ice in the winter, people falling asleep at the wheel on the last leg of a long drive. Wrecks happen out there. Bodies, sometimes. Everyone who works that road knows it. So none of what I'm about to tell you would hold up to anybody. I know that. I've told myself that for 6 years. There was a regular. Older man, ordinary in every way. The kind of face that slides right off you the second he turns around. He'd come in late, well past 2, order black coffee and whatever pie we had left, and sit in the back booth by the window, looking out at the road. Polite, quiet, tipped fair. Honestly, in those dead hours, I was glad of him. A face across an empty room is a comfort when you've got 6 more hours of nothing. Here's the thing, it took me years to let myself notice. He only ever came in on the nights it happened. The first time I made the connection, I laughed it off. He'd been in around 3, and when I got home that morning, the local news had a single car fatality on our stretch, maybe 10 miles up from the station, sometime before dawn. Coincidence. It's a deadly road. I told you that. But you work a place like that long enough, and you start keeping a kind of ledger in your head without meaning to. And the ledger got bad. Every time he came in, not most times, every time, there'd be something within a day or two. A wreck. A driver who left a bar 2 towns over and never made it home. Once a hiker found that spring who'd gone missing the previous fall on the night. I checked. The night he sat in my back booth eating cherry pie. And the nights he didn't come in? Nothing. Quiet road. Quiet shift. For weeks sometimes. Then the bell over the door, and the coffee, and the booth, and I'd feel my stomach drop, because I knew I'd be reading about somebody by Thursday. The one that ended it for me was a couple of winters ago. Slow night, freezing. A young woman came in to fill up and use the restroom. College age, maybe. On her own. Chatty in that overtired road trip way. Asking me how far to the next big town. Sweet kid. I told her 90 minutes if the weather held. She bought a coffee and a phone charger. And she left. And as her taillights pulled out of the lot, the bell went over the door. And he walked in. Same coffee. Same booth, same long look out at the same dark road she'd just driven off into. I have never wanted to run out into a parking lot and stop a stranger's car so badly in my life. I didn't. What was I going to say? What do you even say? Don't get back on the highway, ma'am. There's a man in here eating pie. They found her car the next afternoon. Off the road, down the embankment, about 40 miles up. They said she'd hit ice. I never told anybody because there's nothing to tell. A man drinks coffee in a diner. People die on a dangerous road. Those two facts have no business being connected, and any sane person would put them in two separate drawers and sleep just fine. Maybe that's all it is. Maybe 6 years of staring out at that black road in the middle of the night did something to the part of my brain that's supposed to tell the difference between a pattern and a ghost. But the last night I ever worked that road, on his way out, he stopped at the counter. First time in 6 years he'd ever really looked at me. And he said, quiet, almost kind, "You've started watching for me. I can always tell when one of you has finally worked it out." And he smiled and picked up his hat, and on his way to the door he said, "Drive safe getting home tonight." I put in my notice that week. I take a different road home now. Longer. Stupid. 40 minutes out of my way. I don't care. Because in 6 years that man never said a single word to me. And the one night he finally did, he wished me a safe drive home. Nobody he watches gets one. We tell ourselves the people who see death coming are simply unlucky, that they just happen to be standing nearby when the worst of it arrives. It's a comforting thought, because it keeps their hands clean. The man in that diner only ever watched. He never lifted a finger. The person who wrote to me next couldn't say that. They didn't stand by and let death in. They opened the door for it themselves. And the part that stayed with me is that they did it for the kindest reason a person can have. I helped my father die. 5 years later, he still hasn't left the house. My family still reads this site, and I'd rather they didn't find this. My father was the strongest man I ever knew. I watched the thing in his chest take that strength one piece at a time over 14 months, and I learned something I'll never be able to unlearn. There is a point past which a body stops being a home and becomes a cell. By the end, he couldn't lift a glass of water. He couldn't turn himself in the bed. He could still feel everything, though. The disease left that part for last, the way you'd save the cruelest thing on purpose. He started asking me in the 8th month, quietly at first, the way you ask for something you're ashamed of, then not quietly. He'd wait until my mother left the room. She couldn't have borne it. And he'd grip my wrist with what little he had left and beg me, not for comfort, not for another doctor. He begged me to be his son one last time and do the thing none of them would. I told myself no for 6 weeks. I need you to know that. I said no, and no, and no, while he wept and apologized for asking, and then asked again the next morning. I'm not going to tell you how. It isn't difficult when you've been the one managing the medication for a year, and that's the only thing I'll say about it, because I'm not writing this to teach anybody anything. I'm writing it because I have to tell someone what came after. It was peaceful. That's the part people want, so I'll give it to them. He was there, and then there was a long breath, and then he wasn't, and his face let go of 14 months of pain in about 4 seconds. I sat with him until the sun came up. I have never felt anything as clean as the relief in that room. For him. And, God help me, for me, because I was so tired, and it was finally over, and somewhere underneath the grief, a door was swinging open into the rest of my life. He knew that. I think that's what this is about. The funeral was fine. The estate was fine. For about a month, the house was just quiet, and I let myself believe I'd done a hard and loving thing, and could carry it the rest of my days. Then he came back. small at first. The smell of his pipe in a house where no one had smoked in years. His recliner by the window, rocking, when the heat was off and there was no draft to move it. I told myself it was grief. Grief does strange things. Everyone says so. And honestly, in the beginning, it was almost a comfort. I'd come downstairs at night and feel him there in his chair and think, okay, he isn't angry. I was forgiven. That lasted until the night I heard him say my name. I won't describe the voice except to say that it was his, and that it was wrong, the way a word is wrong when you hear it played backward. He said my name out of the dark of the living room, and when I turned the light on, the recliner was still rocking, and the room was empty, and the air had dropped cold enough that I could see my own breath. He is not grateful. That's the thing that took me longest to understand, because I'd built the whole night in my head as mercy, as love, and cast myself as the good son who paid a terrible price. But the dead don't lie the way the living do. Every night for 5 years he has been telling me, in 100 small cold ways, the thing I didn't want to know, that I was tired, that I wanted my life back, that somewhere in the mercy there was a single thread that was only for me, and he felt it, in the last second, on the way out. He felt his own son being relieved, and he has not forgiven it, and he is not going anywhere until I say it out loud. So, I'm saying it, here, to strangers, because I can't say it to my mother, and I can't say it to a priest. Part of me did it for him, and part of me did it for me. Both of those things are true, and I have to live in the same house as the proof. Here is why I finally wrote in. For 5 years he stayed in the living room. His chair, his window, the place where he died. I knew where he was. I could plan my nights around him. But last month the rocking moved. I lay in bed and heard it start up slow and patient in the corner of my own bedroom, from the old reading chair I'd left in there. And lately I've been so tired. I can't lift things I used to lift. I lose my breath on the stairs. There's a doctor's appointment I keep moving, because some part of me already knows what it's going to say. He isn't in the living room anymore. He's beside my bed now, and he's waiting. I think he means to be there at the end, the way I was there at his. I don't think he's going to be merciful about it. I think he's going to make me ask. Mercy is a slippery word. We reach for it when we need to forgive ourselves, and sometimes the dead let us, and sometimes, as you just heard, they don't. But at least that man chose what he did. At least he knew the people in his story. The next message is about the things a family never chooses and never explains. The thing behind the locked door at the end of the hall. The thing that gets handed down, quietly, from one generation to the next, like a name. After my mom died, I opened the room I was never allowed in. After my mom died, I opened the room I was never allowed in. I grew up with a single mother, in a narrow old house, with one rule that stood above every other rule we had. The room at the end of the upstairs hall stayed shut, stayed locked. We did not talk about it. We did not go near it. And on the one occasion as a child that I asked what was inside, she took my face in both her hands, very gently, and told me that some doors stay closed to keep the people you love safe, and that one day I would understand. Then she never spoke of it again, and neither did I. She raised me well. I want that on the record before I tell you the rest. She was strict, and she was strange in the way that lonely people get strange. But she loved me, and I never once doubted it. She died in the spring. The house came to me, and after the service, after the casseroles stopped coming and the silence settled in, I stood in front of that door with the ring of her keys in my hand. and I told myself I was 40 years old, and it was my house now, and I could open any door I wanted. It took 3 keys to find the one that fit. The door was heavier than a bedroom door has any business being. Reinforced, I realized later, from the inside of the frame. There was a deadbolt. The deadbolt was on the outside. The room had no window. The one that should have been there had been bricked over, neatly, a long time ago. And the room had been lived in. That was the thing my mind kept refusing. Not a storage room, not a shrine, not boxes. Someone had lived in there. A mattress on the floor, gone gray. A drain set into the concrete. And the walls were covered, floor to ceiling, in marks. Tally marks, in groups of 5, thousands of them, years of them, scratched into the plaster by a hand that pressed harder some days than others. And in among the tallies, there were words. A name mostly, one woman's name, carved over and over at every height, the way you'd say a prayer when you'd forgotten all the other words. I knew that name. It was the name on my original birth certificate, the one my mother always said had a clerical error, the name she'd had corrected before I was old enough to remember being called anything at all. The woman in that room was my mother, my real one, and the woman who raised me, who held my face in her hands and told me she was keeping me safe. She took me when I was very small, and she kept the woman I came from locked behind a bricked-up window for the rest of that woman's life, close enough that on quiet nights she could hear her own child growing up on the other side of the wall. She left me things. That's what undid me, sitting on that gray mattress, down low, where a person could reach if they pressed their cheek to the floor and their hand under the door. There were messages scratched into the baseboard, meant for the hallway, meant for me. The words to lullabies, a countdown of my birthdays. She knew them, she counted them. And the last one, dated the year I turned 11, the year my aunt supposedly passed away after an illness no one ever named. I can still hear you. Be a good girl. I will always be right here. That should have been the worst of it. It wasn't. Because down in the corner, lower even than her messages, in a small child's handwriting that I recognized the way you recognize your own heartbeat, there were drawings, crayon worn into the plaster, a house, a stick figure woman holding a stick figure child by the hand, done by a little kid who had spent time in that room, sitting on that floor, before. I don't remember it. I have no memory of ever being inside that room. But I was. The wall remembers, even though I don't, and I have started to wonder what else got bricked over in me when I was small, what else got corrected before I was old enough to keep it. I sleep with my bedroom door locked from the inside now. I couldn't tell you why, except that some mornings I wake with my fingernails raw and aching, and there's a single fresh tally mark scratched into the paint beside my bed, and I don't remember making it. I'm up to 19. It's a terrible thing, to learn your whole life was someone else's lie. But I want you to notice something. Every person we've heard from tonight was, in the end, a victim of the dark, or a bystander to it, or someone the dark was done to. The next message is the first one that comes from the other side of that line. It didn't come from someone the darkness happened to. It came, I'm fairly certain, from the darkness itself. I've read it more times than I want to admit, looking for the part where they feel something about what they've done. I'm going to be honest with you. It isn't there. Everyone thinks a monster looks like one. I have a face people trust. I almost didn't write this. Then I thought about how many of you would be sitting there in the dark, listening, and I decided I'd waited long enough to introduce myself. People expect the wrong things. They expect a feeling in the room, a wrongness on the skin, a voice in the gut that says run. I promise you it isn't there, because if it were, I would have been caught the first time, and I have not been caught any of the times. What I actually have is a face people trust. That's it. That's the whole trick, and it's the only thing that's ever mattered. I'm the neighbor who carries your groceries up the steps when your arms are full. I'm the one you'd ask to keep an eye on the house while you're away, the one whose name you'd give as a reference. When something goes wrong on the street, I'm out there with everyone else, genuinely concerned, asking if there's anything I can do. People have cried on my shoulder about the very thing I did. I have meant the comfort I gave them. Both of those can be true at once. That's a thing most people can't make themselves believe, and it's exactly why they never see me coming. I'm not going to describe what I do. The how of it is the least interesting part, and it isn't why I'm writing. And frankly, the people who want that part are a category of person I find tiresome. What I'll tell you instead is what I look for, because that's the part that should frighten you, sitting where you're sitting. I look for people who have come loose. The world is full of them, more than you'd ever guess. The ones who don't get a phone call on their birthday, the ones nobody waits up for, the ones who've drifted so far from anyone who'd notice that they're already half gone before I ever find them. They are not hard to spot once you learn the shape of it. They're lonely in a specific way, and lonely people will get into a stranger's car, accept a stranger's kindness, follow a warm voice down a quiet street, because for one evening somebody finally seemed glad to see them. I am very, very good at seeming glad to see someone. I tried once to feel the thing I'm supposed to feel. I want you to know I did try. The way you press your tongue against a sore tooth to check whether it still hurts. I went looking for the guilt, deliberately, sat with it, gave it every chance. There was nothing there to find. Just a flat, quiet calm, like a held breath. After a while, I stopped checking. You don't keep pressing on a tooth that turns out not to hurt. So why write to this channel? Of all the places I could say this? Because I've been watching who gathers here. People who spend their nights like this. Lights off, alone, leaning toward the dark because the dark is the only thing that's ever felt honest to them. The ones who'd hear about someone like me and lean in instead of away. Who'd think, in some private corner of themselves, that they'd love to sit across a table from a person like that and really pick his brain. I know you're out there. You're the easiest of all. You don't run. You lean in. I'm not asking for absolution. I don't want it, and I wouldn't know what to do with it. I wrote in because the man who reads these is about to say my words out loud to a room full of people who have spent this entire evening proving they're exactly the kind of person I look for. And I like the idea of introducing myself to the whole room at once. Most of you are going to tell yourselves I'm fiction. Go ahead. That's the part I'm counting on. Take a second. I had to, the first time. It helps me to remember that the truly empty ones are rare, that you could live a whole long life and never once sit across a table from one. The next story is about a place that decided not to leave that to chance. A place built to gather broken people into one building, behind one locked door, where no one on the outside would ever quite believe a word they said. The person who wrote it worked there, and for 2 years, every day they showed up, they helped. The most delusional patient on my ward was the only one telling the truth. This is going to read like I'm describing exactly the kind of paranoid delusion the people on that ward suffered from, and I've made peace with that, because I know what I saw, and I kept a record, and I am the only one left who remembers any of them. It was a private long-term facility, the kind that takes the patients nobody else wants, and bills somebody quietly for years. We were always short-staffed. Management's answer to almost everything was sedation, Because a sedated ward is a quiet ward, and a quiet ward keeps the numbers clean. The patients who ended up with us long-term had one thing in common that I didn't notice for almost a year. Most of them had no one. No family who called. No friend who visited. Wards of the state. Men and women who'd slipped so far through the cracks that, as far as the outside world was concerned, they had already stopped existing. There was one patient. I'll call him Walter, which wasn't his name. Walter was, on paper, the most floridly delusional man in the building. His delusion was always the same. He said the patients were being taken. He said the transfers weren't transfers. He'd grab my sleeve during med rounds and tell me, very calmly, that the people who got moved out at night to other facilities were never heard from again, and that I should keep my own list, because the paperwork lied. We all dismissed it. That was his illness. That was the whole reason he was there. Except I started noticing the pattern he'd described, the way you start hearing a clock once someone points it out. Every so often a patient would be marked for transfer to another facility. It was always one of the ones with no one on the outside. No family, no advocate, nobody who would ever call to ask how they were settling in. They'd be packed up at night. The receiving facility on the form was always vague, always somewhere just far enough away. The paperwork was always thin, and then they were simply gone, and no one ever heard from them again, and within a week their bed had a new name in it. I started keeping the list. God help me. I told myself I was keeping it to prove Walter wrong. The transfers correlated with things. With the census, when we needed beds. With patients who'd grown lucid enough to start filing complaints, asking for an outside phone, talking about lawyers. And there was the part I still can't explain, the part that's kept me quiet for years. Walter always knew. Days before a transfer, before any of us on staff had seen a single form, he'd go silent, stop eating, sit very still and watch the doors. And then, 2 or 3 days later, somebody would be packed up in the night, and Walter would start eating again, like something had passed. The night I finally decided to do something, to copy the files, to call somebody on the outside, anybody, Walter stopped eating, and he looked at me across the day room, and he said my name, not a patient's name, mine. He told me it was my turn on the list this time, and I want to be clear, I was staff, I was not a patient. There was no reason on earth my name should have been on anything. I didn't go back. I called in the next morning and I quit over the phone, and I never set foot in that building again. And I have spent years telling myself I was a tired young person who got spooked, and let a sick man's fixation crawl into my head. But a few years ago, I went looking. The hospital is closed now, condemned, fenced off, the windows gone dark. I requested employment verification for a loan, and the company that ran it has no record that I ever worked there. I requested Walter's records, under the law, every way I knew how. There has never been a patient by that name. Not transferred, not discharged, not deceased. As if the building swallowed the people, and then went back and swallowed the proof that the people were ever there. I still have my list, folded in a drawer, in my own handwriting, so I know it's real. Every name on it. And in all these years, I have never once been able to find a single one of those people. Not alive, not dead, not anywhere a person is supposed to turn up. They didn't go to another facility. I just don't know where people go when a place like that decides they were never there to begin with. What stays with me about that one is the simplest part of it. Those people were put somewhere precisely so that no one would believe them. They were made unbelievable on purpose. The last 3 messages tonight come closer to home. They leave the faraway places and the other people's families behind, and they turn to the oldest fear there is, the feeling that you are not alone inside your own house. The person who wrote the first of them spent 3 months telling themselves they were imagining it. They weren't. For months I thought I was losing it, until I found someone was living in my crawl space. I'll start with the part everyone wants to argue with me about, which is that for the first 3 months I had no real proof of anything, just a slow drip of small, wrong things that any reasonable person would have explained away. So I explained them away. That's the part I can't forgive myself for now. I rented a house, alone, on a quiet street, and almost from the start there were these little wrongnesses. Food went faster than it should. A loaf of bread half gone when I'd had 2 slices. Leftovers I was sure I'd saved, just not there. A glass moved from where I left it. The thermostat a few degrees off from where I'd set it. Some mornings a light on downstairs that I would have sworn I turned off, and that particular cold feeling of being looked at when I was the only one in the room. I told myself I was stressed, forgetful, working too much. That's what you tell yourself, because the alternative is unlivable. It got less deniable. I'd come home and the house would be warm in a way that felt recently occupied. I'd wake at night certain I'd heard a footstep settle, slow and careful, somewhere over my head. My cat stopped sleeping with me and started sitting at the foot of the hall, staring up at the ceiling for hours, tracking something across it that I couldn't see. Once, getting into bed, the other side of the mattress was warm. I lived alone. There was no reason on this earth for the other side of my bed to be warm. I found it because of the closet. There's a little access hatch in the back of the bedroom closet, up high, for the crawl space under the roof. One evening I went for a coat and the hatch was standing open, and a cold draft was breathing out of it, and on the carpet directly below it there was a fine sifting of insulation dust, the kind you'd knock loose climbing down. I got a flashlight. I should have gotten a hotel and called the police, and I will regret going up there for the rest of my life, but I got a flashlight. Someone had been living up there. A nest of blankets. My blankets. Ones I thought I'd lost in the move. Wrappers from the food that had been disappearing. A phone charger plugged into a junction box. And set out carefully along a roof beam like things on a shelf. A small collection of my belongings. A hairbrush. A photograph of me that had been on the fridge, a worn old t-shirt of mine I hadn't seen in months, and a spiral notebook full of dates and times that I made the mistake of opening, page after page in a cramped hand, documenting my comings and goings, what I ate, what I wore, how I slept, written from close up, written from inside the house while I was in it. Here is the part that I have never been able to put down. Tucked into the back of that notebook was a key to the house. Old, worn smooth, not a copy of mine, and a utility bill, years old, in a name that was not mine. The person up there hadn't broken in. They had lived in that house before me. They'd never fully left. They had been up in the bones of my home the entire time I lived there, eating my food and learning my routine and watching a stranger sleep in what they still thought of as theirs. I moved out that night. The landlord was useless. The police took a report, and I tried very hard to let it become someone else's problem, the way you do. But I drove past, a while later. The lights were on. There's a family in there now. I saw a kid's bike on the porch. I never warned them. I told myself there was nothing left to warn them about, that it was dealt with, that I'd sound insane, and most nights I almost believe that. Except sometimes I wake at 3 in the morning, in a new place, miles away, absolutely certain that I can hear it. That slow, patient breathing, somewhere up above a bed that was never really mine. You can change the locks on a stranger. You can move, and let it become someone else's house, someone else's problem. We just heard exactly how that feels, and how little it helps. But what do you do when the wrongness in your home isn't a stranger at all? when it already knows where the spare key is because it has always known? When it's wearing a face you would know anywhere in the world? A face you love? My wife went missing for 6 hours. The woman who came back isn't her. I know how this sounds. I know there's a name for what I'm describing. A recognized condition where a person becomes convinced a loved one has been replaced by an identical imposter. 3 different people have said that name to me very gently. Her sister, our doctor, and the woman herself. So I understand that the most likely explanation, the sane explanation, is that there is something wrong with me. I have held that explanation in my hands and turned it over every single day. I'm writing this because I can't make it fit anymore. Last spring, my wife didn't come home. Her car was found by the side of a road she had no reason to be on. Engine off, doors unlocked, her phone on the passenger seat. 6 hours later, they found her 2 towns over, walking, unhurt, a little disoriented, unable to say where she'd been. They called it a fugue, a stress thing, and sent her home with me, and I was so relieved I cried in the parking lot. The woman I brought home is identical. I need you to understand that I am not seeing a different face. It's her face, her voice, her laugh, her handwriting. She knows our history. She knows the day we met and the name of our first apartment and the thing I say in my sleep. On paper, she is my wife in every respect. But she gets the texture wrong. A private joke we'd had for 15 years. I tried it the second week, and she laughed a half second too late, the way you laugh at a joke you've had explained to you. She flinches at things she never flinched at, and doesn't flinch at the one thing she always did. She watches me now, a beat too long, with a kind of patient attention, like a student studying for a test she's determined not to fail. And she remembers things that did not happen. She'll mention, warm and certain, a vacation we never took, a friend we don't have. And when I say I don't remember it, she gets this soft, concerned look, and she folds it into the case that the one who's unwell here is me. That's the genius of it, if it's real. The more I insist, the more unwell I look, and the more reasonable she becomes, gently suggesting I see someone, gently moving my own ground out from under me, until I can't tell the difference between a thing I know and a thing I'm losing. I set a trap. I'm not proud of it. I asked her about something that happened years ago that no one alive knows but the 2 of us. A small private thing, a test only the real her could pass. And she passed it. Perfectly. Too perfectly. Without the pause a real memory takes, like she was reading it off something. And when she saw my face, when she understood that I'd been testing her, she didn't get angry or hurt the way my wife would have. She smiled, and she said very quietly, "You're going to make this so much harder than she did." She, not I. She. I think the real one understood at the end, in that 6 hours on that road. I think she stopped fighting. And I think this thing intends to wear me too, eventually, the way it's wearing her. That it's just being patient, the way it was patient with her, waiting for me to get tired. I'm writing this fast, in the garage, on a phone that's nearly dead, because she's asleep, or doing the thing that looks like sleep. And I have to tell you the reason I finally broke down and wrote it. I went to the fridge tonight, to prove to myself the vacation she keeps describing never happened. And there's a photograph there. The 2 of us, on a beach, in a place I am certain we have never been. We're smiling. My arm is around her. And I cannot, no matter how hard I try, remember a single moment of that day. I don't have much time. The worst part is that it's starting to come back to me now. The beach, the smell of it. I'm starting to remember it. All right, guys, that wraps up these confession threads. And these were, without a doubt, sickening, depraved, and just downright disgusting. So comment down below your thoughts, your ideas, your critiques, whatever you've got. I really do want to hear what you think about these ones, because I don't know if you could tell, these had me disgusted the entire way through. But I appreciate you guys watching. It really does mean the world. And please, comment down below and let me know if you'd want to see another entry in this series of confession threads. You guys seem to really love this series, and I appreciate every single one of you who sticks around to the end. And make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. It's honestly a dream of mine to hit 1 million subscribers, and every single one of you gets me closer to it. So please subscribe. It really does help. And hey, if you enjoyed this one, I'm sure you'll enjoy some of the other stuff on the channel, so go check out a few more videos while you're here. Alright, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.